If you've ever felt a sudden quiet dread that something in your relationship had changed, even though you couldn't name exactly what, keep reading because what comes next might finally give language to something you've been feeling for a long time. Here's something worth understanding about how people actually behave. Most men picture infidelity as something that crashes into a relationship without warning. One day everything feels solid, and the next it's all fallen apart. But that's not how emotional behavior actually unfolds. In psychology, nearly every significant shift in how someone feels leaves traces behind it. Small changes, quiet signals, behavioral patterns that begin appearing long before anything is ever confirmed or spoken aloud. And here's where it gets complicated. When a man is deeply in love, his mind will work against him. It will rationalize what it sees. It will whisper that she's overwhelmed, that work is stressful, that she's going through something personal. The brain protects what it loves, but attraction, emotional investment, and secrecy don't just live inside someone's head. They always, without exception, change how a person behaves. After studying couples and individuals through countless relationship cases, one pattern emerges again and again. When a woman begins placing her emotional energy somewhere new, she almost never says so directly. What happens instead is a slow, quiet transformation in her behavior, one that leaves her partner feeling confused rather than informed. It isn't always about wanting to cause pain. Human beings are extraordinarily capable of separating their emotional worlds from each other. Someone can still hold genuine care for a partner while simultaneously sending their emotional current somewhere else entirely. And that internal conflict, that tension between guilt, excitement, and loyalty starts bleeding through in the way she acts, the way she speaks, the way she occupies the same space as you. What makes this so dangerous is that men typically don't catch these signs when they're fresh. Something feels wrong, but it's too vague to grab onto. So today, we're going to move through the psychological patterns that tend to surface when a woman's emotional loyalty and attention begin drifting away from the relationship she's in. Not accusations, not paranoia, just patterns. Because when you understand what behavior is actually telling you, you stop second-guessing yourself and start seeing people with clarity. The first signal is rarely what men expect. In fact, it's usually the very thing that causes them to question their own instincts. It starts with something almost imperceptible. Her energy around you begins to change. Not all at once, not in a way that's easy to point to, but steadily, the way a room grows cooler when someone gradually turns down the heat. She's a little less lit up when she sees you. Conversations that once moved easily between you start to feel like they're running on fumes. You talk, she listens, but the interest that used to be in her eyes feels like it's been turned down a notch. This is precisely where most men go wrong. They interpret the distance as a problem they caused, so they double down. More texts, more plans, more gestures, more effort poured into someone who seems to be filling up somewhere else, because that's exactly what's happening, psychologically speaking. Emotional energy functions like a battery. When a person becomes drawn to someone new, intrigued, fascinated, pulled toward another connection, that battery begins recharging in a different direction, and the place it used to replenish starts running low. So the first thing you notice is emotional withdrawal. She may still be physically present. She may still go through the motions of the relationship, but the texture of the interaction is different. There's less warmth in how she looks at you, less spontaneous softness, less of that effortless intimacy that once existed without either of you trying. Not because something in you broke, but because attention, the real currency of attraction, has started moving somewhere else without announcement. And then something else shows up that catches men completely off guard. The emotional distance begins producing irritation. Suddenly, the small things you do, things that were never an issue before, seem to rub her the wrong way. Your humor doesn't land the same way it used to. Your presence sometimes feels like an inconvenience, and somewhere inside you, a painful question starts forming. Why does it feel like she's retreating? The psychological explanation for this is important. When a person is caught between two emotional realities, the mind often manufactures distance as a way of managing guilt. That distance doesn't announce itself as guilt. It surfaces as coldness, as short patience, as a kind of subtle emotional unavailability. Men who encounter this moment typically respond by chasing reassurance. They want to be told everything is fine, but reassurance doesn't repair emotional drift. Understanding what's driving the behavior does. And almost always, once that emotional distance sets in, a second pattern follows closely behind. Her world becomes more guarded than it used to be. Privacy is healthy in any relationship. Everyone is entitled to personal space, private conversations, and parts of their inner life that belong only to them. But psychology draws a clear line between healthy privacy and sudden, uncharacteristic secrecy. And when emotional loyalty begins migrating, secrecy tends to rise. The changes start out small. Her phone is face down more often than it used to be. Notifications that once popped up openly now vanish before you can register them. She steps into another room to reply to messages that she would have answered right in front of you before. None of these things, taken alone, means anything, but patterns are what reveal the truth, because behavior doesn't shift without a cause. When a person starts investing emotionally in someone outside the relationship, the brain becomes instinctively protective of that new connection. It's not always deliberate. Often it's completely automatic, like the mind constructing a wall around something it finds exciting and wants to preserve. She may not become confrontational about her phone, just quietly shielded. If you enter the room unexpectedly, the screen goes dark a little faster than before. If you ask who she's been talking to, the answer feels slightly off, vague, clipped, or overly casual. Most men talk themselves out of trusting what they feel in these moments. They don't want to look insecure. They don't want to seem controlling. So they suppress the discomfort and move on. But instinct isn't paranoia. The brain is constantly processing microsignals, shifts in tone, changes in body language, fluctuations in emotional energy. And when those signals stop aligning with the relationship you believed you were in, something inside you starts searching for an explanation. Here's the critical distinction. Secrecy isn't always about concealing a specific action. Sometimes it's about protecting a new emotional connection before it's fully formed. Psychologists refer to this as emotional compartmentalization, mentally separating two coexisting realities so they don't interfere with each other. On one side, the established relationship. On the other, the new source of attention that feels electric, validating, and alive. To prevent those two worlds from colliding, invisible walls go up. Routines shift quietly. Conversations that used to flow openly begin to close off. And if that internal division continues long enough, something else begins to appear. Something that confuses men more than almost anything else in this entire process. Rather than simply becoming distant, she may start becoming unusually critical of you. When emotional loyalty begins moving towards someone new, a strange psychological process often activates. Instead of feeling more warmly toward their existing partner, a person may begin fixating on that partner's shortcomings. Things that were once overlooked start feeling significant. Habits that never registered as problems suddenly seem worth mentioning. From where you're standing, it can feel like the relationship has been placed under a magnifying glass, and everything you do is falling short. You might start hearing things like, "You've changed," "Not sure ki, batsurstand," or "You don't really get me," "Natris I batsi dach brisao," or "You used to put in more effort," "Isiu dideme firspatuizi than shy." And your natural response is to take it seriously. You examine yourself. You try to communicate more thoughtfully. You attempt to become whatever she seems to be pointing toward. But there's a psychological dynamic at work here that most people never articulate clearly. When a person begins developing emotional investment in someone else, the mind often launches a quiet, unconscious justification process. It's called cognitive dissonance, the discomfort of holding two incompatible truths at the same time. On one side, loyalty to a partner. On the other, the growing pull of something new. To relieve that internal pressure, the brain begins rewriting the story of the current relationship. The qualities that once drew her in receive less focus. The imperfections grow louder. Your flaws feel more significant in her mind. Your limitations feel heavier. And slowly, the internal narrative shifts from this relationship matters to me to something here isn't right. This doesn't mean every criticism in a relationship carries this meaning. But when criticism becomes relentless, emotionally sharp, and untethered from any genuine desire to improve things together, something deeper is usually driving it. Because making the relationship feel flawed gives the mind permission to drift further away with less guilt. And many men, when they reach this phase, respond by chasing approval even harder. They perform, they bend, they try to earn back something that isn't being withheld for the reasons they think. The final signal is the quietest of all. It doesn't crash in, it just settles. And it shows up in where her time, attention, and presence actually go. How a person spends their time and energy is one of the most honest reflections of what they actually value. People move naturally toward what excites them, what stimulates them, what makes them feel emotionally alive. So, when a woman becomes genuinely absorbed somewhere else, her daily patterns begin to reflect that in subtle ways. She's harder to reach than she used to be. Making plans together requires more negotiation. Cancellations happen more often. Rescheduling becomes routine. And even when you are together, the presence isn't fully there. That's the part that cuts deepest. Not the empty schedule, but the empty presence. You can be sitting across from someone and feel completely alone with them. Her attention drifts mid-conversation. Her responses get shorter. What once required no effort between you now feels like something that has to be deliberately constructed. And that's when a specific kind of anxiety starts building quietly in the background. You begin wondering whether you're imagining it, whether you're being too sensitive, whether the relationship is slowly dissolving right in front of you and you're the only one who hasn't accepted it yet. The truth that rarely gets spoken plainly is this. When someone's emotional focus shifts to another place, the relationship they're already in starts to feel less like something they choose and more like something they're obligated to maintain. If any part of this resonated with something you've been experiencing, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Sometimes the most important thing is simply knowing you're not imagining it.